Before we get into how it can be applied to education, I wanted to understand, what do you perceive as AI? What do you think is artificial intelligence?
Well, no one can actually define it, right? I mean, no one knows what it is, but I think today it means the application of what's so-called deep learning. So
Okay.
this new idea of a neural network where you train something on a bunch of images or text, and amazingly, the computer learns, so it programs itself. Every time I say it, it sounds completely amazing, don't you think, Devindra? I mean,
With that, with that.
how does it do that? How do we invent it?
Yeah, it teaches itself and it teaches humans how to program now with codecs
Oh,
from
yeah.
OpenAI. It's amazing. You can put in a natural language prompt and it just generates code for you. It's buggy code, but it's nevertheless
Well,
excellent.
it gets you really started. I think that's the thing. And we'll talk about this for education, but what an advantage, because I've had so many people, the very first thing I ever did was I was a TA for an introduction to computer class. And I'll never forget this woman who actually was in her second career. She was a dancer,
Mhm.
dance for some of the big dance companies. And she just, the day she got her first for loop to work, I just will never forget that bright look in her eyes and feeling of success.
Yeah,
I've lost
it's
track with her, but I just feel like that is the miracle. Programming is so hard and complicated, and maybe we can make it easier and get people to learn it, because it certainly is a valuable skill.
That's true. And when people get their first program to compile, it's an amazing sense of
Oh,
accomplishment.
I,
Yeah,
I still will never forget the smile on her face as she got the thing to run.
that's all.
That joy never ends. You've seen
Yeah.
help someone do that. I
Yeah.
think
So
we have an opportunity to do it at scale now.
exactly, exactly. And that's in fact a great transition into education, because how can AI not only get joy to kids who are learning to program, but how can AI actually help get kids joy in learning overall?
I think you're so. And just getting a machine to work, which is what programming is that motivation that you need. One of my very earliest experiences was we had someone to take care of our kids. We have 3 kids, and she was a nanny, and she just could never get through school. And I think you'll appreciate this. I gave her a Palm Pilot. Remember those old little Palm devices? And she always said, "I'm not a student. I'm not a student. I don't understand this." But just the fact she had some mastery over this device helped. And I'm proud to say, as a result, she got her high school equivalent degree. She got her bachelor's degree, and she actually has a master's in education now.
Wow.
Just that one little thing that I can learn this changed her entire life. Literally changed. I think that's what we need to bring to literally a billion people. So many people who don't have that opportunity.
Yeah, exactly. And so, speaking of which, you say bring it to a billion people. I've heard of many cases and stories where AI can help with, as a become personal tutor, help kids and teachers with their test prep, with test correction, act as a global encyclopedia. Those are wonderful and obvious scenarios. But the challenging question here is, how do you design these AI solutions for a global audience, low cost and scalable?
Well, I think that the as you know, Devindra, this has been a huge problem. I was in China. We founded a number. We worked on a number of educational startups there when China was much poorer than it is today. And just scaling it super hard. I think the good news is these so-called large language models like ChatGPT are showing that while the big ones still need to be run in the cloud, if you have a very specific use case, you can get them to run on a laptop,
Okay.
potentially even a phone. And that kind of development, we can talk about quantization and teacher-student models. That I think is the most promising thing I've heard in a long time for education.
I see what you're saying is that if I have a language model which is not so large, maybe like a mid-sized language model, which can run locally on the edge on my phone,
Yep.
then I don't need the high bandwidth connectivity that we take for granted in the US.
I
Or
think that's the big promise. I often cite the statistic. You and I were around in 1995. I trust.
Yeah.
And I often reflect that a mid-priced phone that costs $200 or $300 here in the U.S. and will cost like $50
Hmm.
is by itself more powerful than the most powerful computer in 1995, the Cray supercomputer. So that
Yeah.
computer that cost millions and millions of dollars is now in everyone's pocket. So we are, we can't judge what can happen when computing costs drop by a factor of a million, which in fact they have over.
Yeah. Agreed. Agreed. Absolutely right. And, I read some statistics that the smartphone penetration in a country like India is pretty high,
Yes.
right?
Yep.
It's amazing. And statistically and anecdotally, I've observed that. I've seen really disadvantaged poor kids with an access to a cell phone or a smartphone rather. So do you think that's what we should be focusing on? How do we get an optimized language model onto these smartphones so that they can be getting personalized attention through these phones?
But eventually, there's always the brass ring, which is where I think we're headed. I think the first thing to do is just see what these models are capable of and
Okay.
see, even with the most powerful ones, can we really help people? And
Yeah.
then I just think engineering is going to work this way. It has for the last 50 years, which is it'll be able to run on a laptop, then it'll be able to run on a phone. Who knows where we go from there?
So are you envisaging this as an app that somebody downloads on the phone and the app actually has an embedded language model and
Yeah,
the training
yeah.
built into it?
I'm technology is such that if you and I dream of it, it's already being done around the world. And
Yeah.
just the fact we talked about it means that someone's working on it right now. So I just have a lot of confidence. I know that in the startups I'm working on, people are already saying, well, that's great in the cloud, but let's scale it down to a laptop. And you're only a short throw away from there to saying, let's run it in a small machine. There have even been experiments where it's running on non-GPU devices. A little technical, but even a Raspberry Pi, which costs about $25, can run various forms of computing, including smaller language models. And I just think that it's inevitable that we'll be able to get it to run on a phone.
So do you think there's a commercial opportunity, or do you think these are social ventures that need to be tackled by people because of philanthropic attitude, or do you think there's money to be made here?
I think the commercial incentive just powers things quite tremendously. And I think in countries like India, the drive for education is a big driver. In China, for instance, which is not the same market, but education comes up over and over again as one of the top things. And if you can get people to spend even a little bit of money and create even a small commercial incentive, I think that just makes it easier. So I'd like to think that you can make a little money and also do good at the same time.
No, you're absolutely right. I mean, when I was growing up in India, the local fruit seller had basic income of maybe a few dollars a month, but she would save most of it to educate her child, right? And parents over there do not want their kids ending up with the same uh, future that they had. So you're right; they absolutely save money to educate their child, and that's a big expense. My parents did that for us. We had, I think, 50 or 60% of my parents' income went into educating my brother and I, and so
I'm,
great.
I'm so grateful to your parents for doing that. It is such a huge sacrifice for a parent to spend like that. And look what they ended up with, you and me.
That's sweet. No, exactly. I'm so grateful. I'm thinking of them and thanking them. It's like to spend 40 to 50% of your annual income on your child's education. That's just amazing. So, Rich, what do you think would be the biggest challenges in rolling out these solutions at scale?
Oh, I think the biggest challenge is clearly having it reach everywhere in India will be very, very difficult and expensive. And it's going to take a small number of dedicated technology folks. And I like to think the little group that we're creating is one of those groups because it
Yeah.
takes inspiration to do these things and focus and desire. I still remember meeting the gentleman, and just to tell a story, we ended up funding a pre-education school company. And its basic business model in China, that's not India, was to bring education to everybody at that point, the lower middle class. He was an educator, but it took his determination and vision to get his company funded to millions and millions of dollars. So I think this is a classic case where Indian entrepreneurism can be successful. I'm very optimistic about that.
Agreed. And there are some Indian unicorns with multi-billion dollars worth of value that
Exactly.
cater to the education system, right? So there's ample commercial opportunity as well over here. Um, do you think that these would have to be offered in multiple languages? Would these need to be
That,
localized or?
that's sort of the beauty of ChatGPT and the large language models is they're already sort of localized already. I mean,
Yeah.
I did one thing which I think is very important to explain, which is that this is not just another kind of computer education. For the first time, we can have a realistic dialogue and sort of a interlocution between the student and a smart teacher that doesn't require a real human. Now, the reason for that's important is because it's a scale issue. As we know, we all, both invested in Indian education, and there's just so many people.
Yeah.
So anything that gives you a multiplier is going to be a huge advantage. And I'm just so excited about this. I actually prepared some demos for this, which can show what's possible with very little training, because the large language models have, in fact, built-in easy translation into Hindi or into French or into a variety of languages. I think that's a huge advantage because localization is, has always been the big Achilles heel of all this software. How do you make it seem natural?
Yeah, that's awesome. Did you want a demo? Do you want to
Yeah,
screen?
I can demo it to you right now. Here. Oh. You have to enable it. There's a little button. You.
Recording stopped.
I'm going to pause recording. Where do I enable this?
Good. Should be in.
Do you want to share your screen?
Yeah, I just want to share the screen. It's in share screen, and you have to allow people.
Yeah. One participant can share advanced sharing options. Multiple host only. All who can share.
Yeah.
There we go. Who can start sharing?
Yeah,
Someone
perfect.
else is sharing.
Fantastic.
Yeah. That's it. Okay. I'm going to resume recording. Or do you want to project?
Just resume recording.
Ready?
You see that?
Press.
Yeah, I can see the screen.
See the screen? Oh, good. Well, I just want to point out what you can actually do with this. You see? Oh, here it is. Got it. Just turned it off.
Recording stopped.
That's okay.
Hey, no problem. No problem. Okay, you can see, right?
Yeah, I can see it.
Slight technical difficulties. We're doing pretty well. We're gonna hit our goal here.
Yeah.
Okay, I just wanted to show how incredible. Now, I have to apologize. I don't speak any of the languages. Yeah, I just wanted to give you an example, just in French, which I do sort of speak. But here's an example. How do I say? And this, I was just in France, so this is actually very relevant things. I walked into a restaurant. I had to say, "Oh, my party is actually inside the restaurant. How do you do it?" And I want to attribute this to Paul Moritz, whom I think we both know. His insight that the advantage of this system is this interactive dialogue. So you sort of meet the student where he is. So it says, how do you say in French, excuse me, I'm meeting my party in your restaurant? And it says, to say, excuse me, I'm meeting my party in your restaurant in French, you can say. And then the interesting thing is this is just textual, but you can actually connect this to a text-to-speech system, but you basically say, excusez-moi, je rencontre mon groupe dans votre restaurant. And now here's the interesting thing. This word rencontre, which I don't really know, well, what does it mean? And so you can just say, why do I use rencontre? And you notice that there's no extra training. We didn't have to teach it. We didn't have to program it. That's what costs money. It says the verb rencontre in French means to meet or to encounter. It gives a complete explanation. The word meeting is used as a verb to indicate you're going to gather with your group. And this is why it's appropriate. And now it turns out I know a little French, and I know this word prendre, which also means to take or to find. And I said, well, why can't I just say je veux prendre? And it says, well, the phrase prendre means I want to take in French. While it may make sense in some contexts, it may not be the best way to express the idea of your meeting a party in a restaurant. In French, when you want to say that you are meeting someone at a particular restaurant, it's more common to use the verb rencontrer or retrouver to meet up with. And so you can see it's very naturally, and somewhere must be a French training system in there. It's very naturally explained to you what it means. And it actually does say, while it may be understood if you say je veux prendre, it may sound awkward or unclear. And so you see, this is an example where the system is meeting the student where they are, right? And it can ask it questions. Now we could have written this up, right? Had a program to do this, but this is actually in the large language model. I think that's the path. And you can change languages. So let's just try this. How do I say this in Hindi? It says, how do I meet already in a restaurant? Now you can tell me whether this is correct or not. I've tried this for Chinese and it actually works. So you can tell me whether that's accurate or not. But as you can see, it helps you a lot. And it's interesting because it knows, since I'm speaking English, that it provides, the sort of phoneticization as opposed to just doing this. And I think this is the value, right? I just switched from French to Hindi. Think about this. Before this, how many man hours of programmer do we need to do this? Right. Yeah. And I want to, at this point, give you, say this is completely Paul Maritz's insight, and all I'm doing is a demo that shows it. Can I show one other example that shows it for programming? Okay. So how many times have you just wanted to ask a teacher, here's my Python program, what's wrong with it? And it says if A is greater than B, then B equals 2. Now, 90% of all programming languages, this is pretty close to correct, as you and I both know, right? But it is actually incorrect in Python. And here's what it says. And this is because the large language model, in this case ChatGPT, has ingested so much programming documentation. It knows there are a few issues with this program. You provide a semicolon at the end of the first line. It's not necessary in Python. The colon is missing after the if statement. There should be an indentation for the second line, and there's no closing of the program with a print. It even tells you you're not going to get any outputs. Right? And it actually even gives you the corrected version. If A is greater than B, B equals 2, print B. Right? Now, here's the interesting thing. You can ask it real questions, and again, you're meeting the student where they want to be, which is, why don't you need a then in a Python if statement? And it actually gives a very good philosophic reason. In Python, if statement is followed by a colon instead of the keyword then, like in some other programming languages. The colon indicates the start of a new block of code that should be executed if the condition in the if is true. The reason why Python does not use then is mainly due to its design philosophy. So actually it gets into this philosophy of design, which is super fascinating. Now, I just wanted to show this actually works. You can actually say, please explain this in French. And I read a little French, and this is actually correct. On Python instruction, if a suivre the point. And I actually tried, please explain this in Hindi. And I'll leave this to you as to whether or not it's correct or not. But again, there was no work done to actually make this translation. Now, this is not perfect. It requires some hints. You need to customize it and so forth, but it is very possible, I think, just take this, say, Python instruction and shrink it down, get it to run on a small computer or a laptop. And I just want to leave this last thing. You can even say things like, how would I write the Python code in the style of hip hop? So if you are a hip hop fan, here you go. Yo, let's get coding with Python. So we can really meet the students where they are.
Teacher.
Oh, I think being inclusive is a challenge. Really difficult. There's such a have and have-nots thing. There's gender disparity, racial disparity, ethnic disparity. So I think it's one of the key things you have to think about first. To me, the big issue here is, first of all, these large language models do have biases in them, but there's ways to fix it. There's technologies such as reinforcement learning with human feedback that can fix these things. But I think the bigger thing is in the things that you and I work on, let's make sure we don't leave people out. And this, and I think it requires two things. One is having the sort of the out groups included in the discussions about developing this technology. The second thing is an explicit strategy that says, no, we need to reach out to everybody. And, a lot of times, practice and strategy sort of one comes after the other. But in this case, yeah, let's make sure that every woman in India gets educated. Let's make sure that everyone who's poor in a village gets educated. It comes from that dedication.
That's a fantastic vision. So thank you for participating in the think tank to think through low-cost, scalable education solutions. We could go on and on about this conversation. Like you and I are both super passionate about it.
Absolutely.
But thank you for kicking off this conversation, and I hope we can do this.
There's a lot more, man. It's great, and we're gonna have an offsite and everything else. I'm super excited about it.
Thank you, Rich.
Okay, hey, this worked. We even did it in the 40-minute time limit.
Yep, we did. Thanks again.
Okay, man.